Hello, we are going to go ahead and get started. We do have Larry here, which is a good thing given that this is the Hedges lecture. It is good to see folks trickling in. Welcome. My name is Nate Jones. Along with Saroja Warner, I am one of the chairs of the conference this year. And I have to say, it's so good to see so many people in person. It has been a long time since this community has come together. And in fact, my first SRI was here in Crystal City back in 2008. I was a very green doc student, and I came to see this fabled Crystal City and got here, and there weren't many crystals, and it was kind of barely a city. But I have the distinct honor of introducing the Hedges Lecture this year. The Hedges Lecture is an annual award that has been presented by SRI since 2016. The lecture is named for Larry Hedges, who is up here somewhere in the front, to honor his work developing statistical methods, advocating for the improved rigor of education and social science research, and providing foundational leadership to SRI. The award is meant to provide an outlet for us as a SRI community to honor the central role that methodological development and advocacy for scientific rigor play in improving educational research. With that in mind, I want to introduce the 2022 Hedges Lecture, which will be given by Professor Barbara Schneider, who is here with us today. I'm excited that SRI has chosen to give Barbara the Hedges Lecture this year because, to me, Barbara is doing precisely the kind of research that I think the SRI community can learn from right now. In strict terms, Barbara is not a methodologist. She's methodologist adjacent. She is a sociologist in her bones. And if you know Barbara, you know how deeply, deeply committed she is to improving the lives of children and the role of research in that endeavor. That commitment is her compass, and it has guided what has been a truly remarkable career. It is hard and intimidating to try to summarize Barbara's contributions to the field. To me, the key defining feature is that she conducts problem-led work. Not discipline-led work or methods-driven work, problem-led work. And that's a really powerful framing, but it's not all that common to find in a person. When Barbara cares about an issue, she is dogged about it. She will learn new methods, whether it's the experience sampling method or whether it's her interest in experimental design, and she will find new people. She is constantly stretching and pushing. And when the question demands new frameworks or expertise outside of her own, she will always find new partners. She will seek out others' expertise and collaboration anywhere. Just consider for a moment the wide range of scholars she has collaborated with. Jim Coleman, David Stevenson, Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, Tony Bright, Kathy Borman, Linda Waite, Larry Hedges. I could go on, but it is a tremendous list. She has made foundational contributions to many different literatures, publishing over 150 articles and reports and writing 18 books, including Trust in Schools, my favorite, The Ambitious Generation, Being Together, Working Apart, and Learning Science, The Value of Crafting Engagement in Science Environments. In addition to her scholarship, Barbara has an exemplary record of service. She has been influential at SRI since its founding, serving on the governing council beginning in 2008 and as vice president from 2010 to 2013. But beyond SRI, she is a former AERA president. She is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Academy of Education, AERA, and the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters. She has served as editor for Sociology of Education and Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis. She has served as an external advisory board member to regional education labs, the Mindset Scholars Network, and the World Education Research Association Council, among others. Her impact is broad and it is everywhere. Just one last note. Barbara was my advisor, and as anybody who has worked with or has been trained by Barbara can attest, she brings that same relentlessness to her mentorship. And it's not just her students, she has championed the work of many junior scholars, particularly women in methodology. Barbara can be blunt. She also has all sorts of funny euphemisms to tell you that your work can get better. If she tells you this is terrible, I hate it, that's actually pretty good. You leave your office with her office with your head held high. If she says something like, "This makes me want to jump out a window," you know you have a long road ahead. But what I came to appreciate so much about Barbara is her personal investment in the careers of those who came under her umbrella. Her way of loving you is to push you. She won't stop until you succeed. And when she says your work makes her want to jump out a window, she's really saying, "I love you, I respect you, I care about you." So in closing, I just want to say, Barbara, you make me want to jump out a window. Thank you so much for everything you've done for me and for the SRE community.
Oh my goodness, there are no windows. Anyway, I just wanted to begin by first thanking you, of course, Nate. That was just magnificent. I kept wondering where Barbara Schneider was. And then I would like to thank the committee for this wonderful honor. I'd also like to personally thank Larry Hedges, who I have worked with. He had the vision and the understanding of creating a society dedicated to raising the importance of high-quality educational effectiveness research for improving learning, instructional practice, and policy, and including the methodological advances that can inform and accelerate these goals. Thank you, Larry. Thank you. Good. I thought if I have to really press that button. So just a few words about myself and how I got to the rationale and examples of my talk today. My career in education research started as a graduate student at Northwestern University, where I had the opportunity to learn about randomized trials from my professors, who included Robert Baruch, Donald Campbell, and Tom Cook, all of whom were in the sociology department. At that time, half your graduate courses had to be taken outside of the School of Education. And I think for me, that is what distinguished the major disciplines that have shaped my view of what is needed in educational research. While earning a lot about RCT designs, I was concerned that many of the examples that we studied seemed somewhat restricted to measuring differences between and among groups. I wanted to make a big difference, small people, big difference. But that was graduate optimism, something that would allow me to generalize to the population under investigation. This led to quasi-experiments, spending time in political science and sociology, which is where this type of work at that time was going on, especially in political science, where the person teaching it, I think that's one of the reasons I went, looked a lot like John Lemon. Anyway, he even brought his dog. So these kinds of things and my ambitions culminated with an 8-year stint at the University of Chicago. I'm a slow learner, with James Coleman. This experience really extended and deepened my knowledge of quasi-experimental designs, forming a clearer understanding of why and how sociological studies should be conducted, underscoring the value and significance of theory and statistical analysis for everything from large secondary databases to network analysis and mixed methods with case study material. As a result, the work I'm going to discuss today brings me back full circle, back to the rigorous evidential benefits of randomized trials and through the lens of a sociologist. I fully support the elegance of RCT designs, and as a sociologist, I champion interventions that are designed to lessen the inequities in our educational system with what I term holistic designs. My goal as a researcher are to take particular care in understanding and measuring the situational context of a treatment, including its subjective elements, which we often now refer to as social and emotional constructs of learning. My talk today has 4 major sections. It's long. It's longer than I usually lecture. You know, usually by this time I've said to somebody in the room, well, what do you think? And then someone will answer, and then you say, oh, thank goodness. But that's not how it's going to go, so forgive me. Anyway, I have these 4 sections that I wanted to talk about. The first is I'm going to discuss the 2 RCTs that I've been working on ever since 2014. Second, I'm going to talk about considerations when evaluating RCT designs. And here I'm going to emphasize the importance of valuing what is likely to make a difference in learning, instruction, and policy. I think Beth brought this up earlier today. And the import of a sound theoretical base that gets threaded and reflected throughout the treatment. Then I'm going to talk about achieving equity with a focus on inclusion, building a diverse sample, measurement of context, necessity of objective observations, social and emotional considerations, and then some provisos of reasonableness for design and the conduct of RCTs. So now I get to really be excited. So the first slide here is crafting engaging science environments, which we abbreviated to CC, not one of our best acronyms. But you know, it happens. CC is a high school chemistry and physics project-based learning intervention that meets the next generation of science standard performance expectations, the National Research Council recommendations for designing science curriculum, incorporating 3 dimensions of learning, disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and scientific and engineering practices, and principles of project-based learning that we call PBL. PBL principles were developed over several years, actually decades, but Joe and I like to say years, it works. To Professor Joe Krajcek, who is at MSU, and he's one of the major leaders in science education research. And Nate, here's my next new strongest collaborator. In 2018-19, we administered a randomized control trial to a diverse group of over 4,238 students in chemistry and physics classes in 70 high schools in California and Michigan. The intervention included curriculum materials, professional learning for teachers, and a series of formative assessments. The analysis was estimated using a hierarchical linear model with pretest and student demographics as covariates and an outcome measure. Student performance on either chemistry or physics items from not us, but an objective test, the Michigan State Science Assessment. Results showed that the treatment students on average performed 0.20 standard deviations higher than the control students. The results are quite large, especially considering the advanced subject matter of the units and that they only extended over a 12 to 16-week period. Mediation analysis showed an indirect path between teacher and student reported participation in modeling practices and science achievement. Exploratory analysis indicate positive treatment effects for enhancing college ambitions. Our results suggest that improving secondary school science learning is achievable with a coherent system that supports students in doing science. I have to say to you, after a very long career, that the 2 studies I'm going to talk about today, I can say with a smile, and I was so happy that I was invited here, because so rarely do you ever walk away and get that effect that you really hoped you were going to get. So the second part here that I just wanted to talk very quickly about are what I call our equity enhancements. So I call this that because they're examples of what we use but have relevance to other RCTs, and that were specifically designed to assist all the students in succeeding in advanced science courses that often serve as gatekeepers, posing barriers to college admission, especially for schools that serve predominantly low-income and underrepresented groups. The intervention focused on what students should know and be able to do, similar to the practices of scientists and engineers, deliberately providing inclusionary activities, not exclusionary, and team experiences where students participated irrespective of their present knowledge and skills. These experiences were designed to help students assuage their own self-interests for that of the common good that led to a group production of a solid artifact. The instructional learning lessons emphasize inquiry, discovery, and interpretive skills. The second I forgot to say, the first one was funded by the National Science Foundation. I forgot to put that on. This one was funded by the George Lucas Educational Research Foundation. The second RCT, also conducted in 2018-19, yeah, we were really busy that year, was multiple literacies and project-based learning. This one, we were smart enough just to use the letters, which we called MLPBL, which was designed to determine whether the intervention enhanced student science, academic, social, and emotional learning. This randomized control trial was conducted in 46 Michigan schools, 23 treatment and 23 control, which included 4 regions in the state. The final analytics sample was 2,301 students, and it had the very similar to the CC design, where in fact we had curriculum materials, professional learning, informative assessments, HLM estimations. We had a higher effect of 2.77, and we also used an objective measure of the Michigan State Science Assessment. The equity enhancements were also similar to the CC ones in that both treatments oversampled underserved minority students, and this really true was an oversample of minority and low-income students in California and Michigan, as well as in Michigan. Engaged in practice similar to science and engineers, teachers stressed having the student drive discussions. Teachers were encouraged to take responsibility for ensuring all students participated in classroom activities and all voices were heard and repeated by different members of the class. Research questions related to social and emotional learning were also investigated, specifically whether the treatment supported more positive responses on measures of self-reflection, collaboration, and responsibility for one's own and others' work. It's important to underscore that few studies measure elementary school students' social and emotional learning in these science classes. These 3 latent variable constructs, self-reflection, ownership, and collaboration, were also shown to be higher in the treatment group than in the control condition at the end of the intervention. Our results here also indicate the possibilities for obtaining validated measures of young children's SEL responses for selected constructs, specifically designed, and this is really important, to be contextually relevant for activities experienced during the intervention. Okay, and now I'm gonna just take a little bit of a detour here to my friend, Mr. Coleman, because this is something that I feel very strongly about, and I want to explain why context is so important in RCT designs. One principle that Coleman advocated was moving away from studies of discrete individual behaviors. That's what happens when you start out as a chemical engineer rather than a psychologist. And to studies that examine actions and orientations of individuals in a social system, like a classroom. The idea that behaviors and orientations of students in classrooms needed to be studied and understood in a social system. In such a social system, students' behaviors and orientations are merged into a normative environment shaped by peers, teachers, parents, schools, and neighborhoods. Given this explanation, our intervention followed this conceptual idea and was designed to investigate students' learning of science in a social system that identified the contextual properties in a classroom likely to support or impede desired treatment effects. An example of this would be the items on our teacher observation protocol that measured a range of teacher and student behaviors, including classroom management actions. And in other studies, you might think about bullying behavior, in which it's really important to gain an understanding of the social system in which the behavior manifests itself, taking into account multiple contexts and factors. And my hunch is that ignoring these in both the treatment and control conditions is why we sometimes find small treatment effects and fade out for the intervention over time. An additional goal of research from Coleman's perspective is when taking a systems approach, here the intervention itself should be designed to achieve a productive societal goal. This productive idea aligns with his definition of social capital, which can be developed in positive social systems that support outcomes like, in our case, academic education performance. For me, our overriding goal was to enhance academic and social learning, which I consider as the most fundamental societal goal of schools for all children, especially those that have been systemically underserved in our educational system. And while literacies in reading and mathematics are viewed as the basics of learning, my deepening concern has been the neglect of science learning. I believe that science learning, no different than the focus it once received in the 1950s, I wasn't there except in kindergarten. It is essential for the preparation and employability in an uncertain labor market and the abilities to grapple with the menacing problems of environmental change, new human diseases, and the boundaries of artificial intelligence and robotics. Now, I just have one point, and Beth really stressed this earlier, so I tried to cut out about as much of this as I could. But when I'm thinking about conducting a study, especially an effectiveness trial, I focus on the intervention that gives us hope. Hope for the possibility that the outcome will have value and the potential to create real, sustained change. I start here because too often people are recruited to conduct trials without having any perspective on whether it will matter. My first rule, these studies should just not have intellectual significance, but also have a real practical value that shows promise for making a real change in learning. As Coleman and his mentor Robert Merton argued, mid-level action studies are what can lead to strong theories of behavior. Our challenge is in looking for and conducting promising interventions with innovative instructional strategies and materials which are designed to increase the academic learning as well as the social and emotional needs of all children. My second priority is that the intervention has to be steeped in a theoretical model and its components can be easily identified in the treatment condition. Now, this is just real quick, our heuristic model. It's the model that we used both in CC and here. Each of the boxes provides actions or orientations that should have measures and assumptions related to the outcome. In the case of the two interventions we studied, the treatment explicitly emphasized academic, social, and emotional learning with activities and materials and assessments that were deliberately designed to create equitable environments where all children have the opportunity to learn, which provides students with differing, this is the part that's what's most important, with differing levels of support. The intent was to create flexible instructional lessons, menus designed to equalize the science knowledge and skill acquisition for all students, irrespective of their prior academic, social learning, and historical and cultural base. The model shows the NRC and NGSS drivers, the box above, the principles, and if you really can read real fast, PBL. And these are what guided the behaviors and actions of our teachers and students that were threaded throughout all of the different aspects of our intervention. Now, the examples in the treatment classrooms, all students are encouraged and supported to participate in asking questions. It's a flip on the teaching style. The teachers are guided not to talk first, but that the students should be asking the questions that are meaningful, personal, and culturally based to them. That they should collaborate and work in diverse teams where skill sets are likely to vary, and prompted to share personal science experiences both in and out of the classroom. These ideas were further articulated theoretically and applied with specific methods and items developed to measure the impact of the treatment. At both the secondary and elementary level, students were asked questions about their interests, skills, and challenge in specific science activities with age-appropriate language. So if you understand the concept of being in situ, this means that these kinds of social and emotional feelings were done when they were in their science class in these lesson level activities. So during teacher professional learning sessions, and this is also very important, it wasn't that we made the teachers feel that they were third grade students or that they were back in high school, but rather we really worked on guiding them with special activities in which fostered greater participation and inclusivity among all students in every lesson level description specified in the intervention. And now, what are some of the things that we talk about in terms of trying to achieve equity and inclusion of RCTs? And the first, of course, is the sample. For me, equity is providing opportunities for all students, and to achieve that goal requires sample selection that it's large enough to include diverse populations of students and schools, classrooms, in order to conduct robust subsample analysis for heterogeneity, showing interaction effects of factors such as racial, ethnic, social class, and its relationship to the treatment effect. When determining power estimates, we often use broad measures such as socioeconomic status, grade levels, school performance measures. These measures are all grounded in evidential studies that represent variations in human and social capital, which are shown to have differential effects on behavior and attitudes. I need to underscore this point. Why? These are not random numbers, or we're not brainstorming ideas here, but they're used for blocking the purposes of the usual suspects because there are multiple studies that show differential outcomes for social class that extend to labor market opportunities, health, financial stability, and parenting skills. These sampling constructs represent the start of a contextual description of the classroom or a school, depending on the social system where the intervention is occurring. For example, grade level in a school carries rich developmental assumptions of behaviors. For example, if we're going to focus on third graders, that means that the ability to read in the fall better show a large variation, and by the spring, the majority of the third graders should be reading, because that's what all the studies typically happen in a third grade classroom. My interest in thinking about identifying smaller grain size contextual factors likely to impact subgroup treatment effects, primarily those that focus on social and economic resource differentials. For example, regional variations, school enrollment size, school sector, high and low performing schools, and teacher retention. All of these depend on your question, and I am stressing the importance of considering contextual sampling frames from the onset and underscoring the need to account for these broader social contextual factors when seeking balance between treatment and control conditions, with the deep caveat, don't choose too many of them because that's going to ruin the rest of what you're doing. So, the next thing is measuring the context. From the beginning of an evaluation, my biggest challenge is in trying to consider and recognize what conditions might be affecting the treatment and find appropriate measures for identifying them. Assuming that the randomization process gave you similar classrooms, I always ask myself that question about, well, how really truly similar are these classrooms? You know, you go through this process, you have it, and they look like they're perfectly balanced, but that, to me, is just the beginning. Because I always think to myself, well, there are these spoilers. And the spoilers tend to fall into three groups. The first is physical resources. And this we have found you walk into science rooms and they don't have hoods. They don't protect the kids when they're doing all kinds of experiments. For little kids, you go to places, there's no green grass. There's no courtyard. There's no place to play. And you have to think about, like, what about these schools? And we look at pictures. We want to understand them because there has to be not these huge physical differences between the treatment and the control condition. Then the second are social capital resources. I, spent a lot of time on that social capital, 8 years, Jim Coleman, you heard the story. So these are these positive relational ties with the principal, the teachers, toward making a change in science instruction, meaning they gotta be on board about that. And I probably should put in a plug for, what's everybody's favorite, Trust in Schools, where many of these conditions are described in the appendix: openness to innovation, parent involvement, and so on. And then finally, human capital, because that's the willingness on the part of teachers not only for participation in professional learning, for continuing education credits, honorarium, but it's a system whereby we can track their questions, perceive problems during the intervention, as well as what's happening in the control conditions. The point here is that we assume randomization, that we expect the groups to be similar by sampling, but sometimes things happen which are not accounted for. A little voice, given my size, though my office neighbors would probably be looking for a giant, or at least somebody that tells people to jump out of windows, to be very cautious about not cherry-picking contextual factors that can favor the treatment over the control group. But that should be present in both groups. For example, in the control group, a willingness to participate in data collection, allow for observations of us when they're teaching science in the way that they usually do. Present us with examples of positive social capital of existing in also the control group. Here's where equity considerations take the lead. The idea is to identify what social and economic resources add or take away from providing learning opportunities that may be impeding intervention effects, such as time on instruction, or schools with high teacher turnover that can be masking other factors such as ineffectual leaders, school violence, rumors of school closure. These are likely to be clustered for some students in different classroom schools in either treatment or control conditions. Clustering, which can be the driver of an unequal treatment effect, especially among subgroups, was the case in the third grade analysis where Asian students in the treatment group had a surprisingly lower treatment effect on their performance. So you can imagine what a hiccup that caused. Well, we went in and we looked real carefully, and what we found is that, well, yes, of course, the numbers of Asians in both sides look the same, but it turned out that the Asians in the control group were spread out. But the Asians in the treatment group were clustered, and they were clustered in low income, low performing schools, and where there, in fact, were large numbers of ELLs. Now, it's another key point in all of this is looking for sources and measurement of student and teacher missingness from the beginning of a study when working in low-income and underserved communities. Patterns of missingness are often the consequences of extenuating circumstances. For older students, it can be the need for childcare. For younger students, transportation problems. In both situations, higher flu, contagious diseases, and which also affects teachers and substitutes. Absentee and its consequences for treatment implementation, especially in underserved communities, should be accounted for, as well as some of the practices teachers have used to support students. Other extenuating circumstances, especially when working in underserved communities, are determining if there's a change of teachers in the classroom. That can happen before the intervention and after the treatment. Replacement of teachers, especially with substitute teachers, often in out-of-field certification, can really affect your treatment, positive treatment, and move it the other way. Other events which happened to us that created missingness of certain lessons not taught were a 3-week strike in another district facing financial problems, consolidated classrooms, so we lost a classroom, not because the teachers attrited, but they were moved into teaching a different classroom, and lengthened vacation time. These factors contributed to missingness of lessons and teacher and student participation. And you might ask, why aren't these ideas in the sampling selection? Simply because clustering and size of missingness and its sources are often presented in study analyses as those surprises, which at first glance, well, you know how that feels. My rule of thumb, never make assumptions that everything is going to go smoothly, because it doesn't. Check-ins are imperative for determining potential structural, contextual effects likely to be impacting treatment effects, and keep clean records that can be verified for missingness of students, teachers, and school leaving. We were very fortunate. We never had teachers that said, I don't want to do this. And we didn't have kids that didn't show up for science because they don't like science. But we had other things that made missingness happen that really caused attrition. So I think that this is a point that we really want to think very hard about. And then this point for me is really the one that I just cannot say enough about, because it affects implementation, fidelity, all of that, which is you cannot do this work unless you're willing to do those observations in the treatment and in the control condition. And I would really caution everybody, we all know that this kind of work is very demanding, but the best way to understand the impact of a treatment is with in-person observations. And the first actual in-person random observations of the teacher executing treatment and what types of instruction is occurring in the control condition. In the case of the treatment, it is important not just to indicate that it occurred, but the quality of the execution. It's important to document both indicators of the teacher, but the students as well. So when you're in that room, it's not what the teacher did, it's what the teacher and the students did. And it's important to make sure that you're not just doing it for the treatment, but you're also doing it for the control, to make sure the control teachers haven't decided to do the treatment as well. So these are the kinds of contextual things that we considered. They're tried to, our treatment, I'm very aware of time, so I just wanted to give you just a little bit of what we did. And so this kind of tells you all about it. And for those of you who think that we really aren't good methodologists, we did all the hard work, including finding people that were science teachers to be our observers, training them really well, looking at, reliabilities, conducting ICCs. So I feel that in terms of our observations, we really got that one down pat. And this next slide, which I hope some of you can read, kind of gives you an understanding of what was in these teacher observations. And I want you to understand this was a 4-point scale that we used. And in addition to that, everybody had to do their field notes. And we went through a very long discussion about this because the field notes had to be evidential with respect to what the people were actually seeing in the classroom. So we would have the field notes, that we would have the scales, and then at the end, we also conducted a survey. Why did we conduct the survey? Because we wanted to also have this as a secondary kind of line to understand the implementation. Please just do not conduct the survey. Please conduct the observations. The observations are critical. They help us. We can understand what's going on. And finally, I want to get to the social and emotional context for learning. Increasingly, we recognize the impact that social and emotional learning has on academic performance. For me, this intervention of project-based learning allowed for 3 factors. One was personally meaningful questions, so the students were introduced to learning conditions that mattered to them, that was embedded in their own cultural base of understanding. The second is that the intervention offered opportunities for all children to participate, even though their initial skill levels varied. And we have that, of course, in all of what we tried to do when we randomized. Inclusionary opportunities for all children is a facet of treatment that we need not only to design, but to document its validity and in the context of the intervention. And third, the treatment engages the student in learning activities that are authentically different as specified by the treatment, not necessarily what's happening in the control condition. In our case, we deeply studied the social and emotional measures used in other work. However, most do not look at the variation in emotionality that is not consistent or understanding how such patterns of social and emotionality can vary in situ, meaning unless observed when happening. Trusting merely on observations for such concepts of engagement, inclusion, persistence, need to come from valid, reliable measures from the students in both the treatment and control conditions and in the times when they're actually doing what is the intervention. We have used very innovative methods for doing this work. Now it's my time to do a little bit of shout out, and everybody who's involved in this is going to get very embarrassed. But first, I would like to thank Chris Klager because he did all of the field work for the secondary study. He's also the person that did a lot of the work on social and emotional learning with the ESM. And it's because of Chris that those days that I thought, oh, why am I doing this? I kept coming back to work and working hard on what I was doing, because he did some single case design work, which showed that we had variation in when the treatment worked for the student and when they weren't doing the treatment. And I thought, my God, in a single case design, if I'm able to show that kind of variation, just imagine what kind of variation we might get in the classroom. So I got very excited about that. Chris also put together with Quentin Baker the files for the secondary school study. The elementary school study, Quentin did with Lydia Bradford, and Lydia is right there blushing. But This work could not have all happened without Lydia. And I want to say thank you and congratulate Lydia. And also I-Chin, who is not here, but I-Chin Shin worked very hard on that. And now Kayla Barrett, who's sitting right next to her, has taken on the torch and has moved us into doing some very new innovative experimental work with third graders, where we're also studying what their interest, skill, and challenge when they're in situ. So I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful, wonderful students and postdocs that have gone on to very exciting careers. Quentin Baker's at the USDA. He's actually advising Biden's economic advisor on what climate change is doing to agriculture. So there are wonderful things that have happened, not only to our students, which really surprised me, but also to everything that has gone on as a consequence of this work. The PIRE work started out as an international activity with the University of Helsinki. That helped us a great deal in the beginning because we had not only our own understanding of what we thought that good science learning was about, but we also had our neighbors in Finland working with us on all of these different things. We served on committees of each other. We had a wonderful collaboration, but they couldn't raise the money to be able to do an efficacy study in 2018-19. And we didn't want to wait. Thank God we didn't wait, because we never would have made it, because the next year, when we had promised the control teachers in both the elementary and secondary study that we would offer them the treatment, COVID happened. And there is one person that I haven't thanked. I hope she's listening. She's in Spain. That's Sarah Mistral. So Sarah basically said, Barbara, we just have to find out how these kids are doing. And she and another student, Rachel now is the administrator for the Faculty Senate at Berkeley. And the two of them developed all of these questions that we asked our secondary school science students that were in class. Well, they weren't in class, they were over Zoom. And this is before we actually had the numbers. And it kind of brought things down a lot, because they said, oh, I really miss going to science class. We were really having a lot of fun. Now you have to understand, what teenager tells you that they want to go back to school and go to their science class? I thought, but they had nothing. It wasn't like they knew Sarah and Rachel, and it wasn't like they were going to impress their teachers. They were on Zoom. They did these things in a Qualtrics survey that they figured, someone might look at or not look at. So we sort of felt they weren't just pulling our legs. But anyway, it was really a very, very uplifting experience. And so in kind of the ending of all of this, I believe I've reached my goal, that I want to start with the first thing. This is a little dig at the economists, forgive me, but I don't think we need thousands of replicated interventions. I just don't think that's going to help us. Sorry, J. Paul. What I think we really need is high quality designs that have a grounded theoretical reason for why certain actions are likely to lead to productive ends. If we're going to do RCTs, let's do them right. Let's be real conscientious about them. Let's do those, make sure we know what we're doing, and let's do them right, because they can tell us things. I know, in my heart of hearts, if we get that chance, we'll be able to really make a difference in the way kids learn science. Second, that we have to recognize that statisticians hate that messy grayness of human interaction. It's not their thing. And the vagaries of the fluidity of school life. not their thing. So plan for these early on and what contextual measures you need to obtain that could impact treatment effects. And then you need to conduct long-term assessments from the very start. It's not just the pretest. You got to be in there. You have to be able to gauge the ebbs and flows of learning within an intervention time frame, so you have a better understanding and interpretation of your treatment results. Then let's not hitch ourselves to fade-out studies. Fade-out studies are important, but they have to be done if you're willing to take on the complex complications of individual changes and contextual variation that are undoubtedly going to occur from one classroom to the next and the attrition of the original sample. And we know what kind of attrition we get ordinarily. We know how difficult it is to measure these variations in context in a classroom. So just try and think about fade out in that context, even though I think the models are interesting and I have great faith that we'll get there someday. I think it's really important that we think about, is that where we want all of the resources to go now? And then lastly, to stay in touch with new opportunities about RCTs. Today I heard someone talk about the fact that you can't generalize with an RCT. Well, they just haven't run into Liz Stewart or Beth Tipton, right? And the generalizable index. So that's not going to go down really well. And I think that the other point that we really need to make here is that these are lots of things going on in the world of RCT design and analysis, and we really need to be paying attention to them. I'm a learner. Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I'm a learner, and I'm in the journals and begging Lydia to help me brush up on my Bayes knowledge, of which I have limited. So my thought is, stay with it, make it better. So my concluding remark is, my challenge in doing this work is trying hard not to overlook how important it is in an RCT to press on capturing the hidden factors that may affect the outcome of the treatment, and to do that in the beginning. I think hard about those unobservables in the classroom, with the teacher behaviors, the characteristics of the classroom and the schools, which may be the reason for a positive or negative result. Then to make sure I have some of these based on behaviors I can measure. I often think of this as something like the identification strategy of economists, all the things that could change your outcome. Even when you have a promising intervention with a clean, balanced, randomized sample with reasonable covariates and solid measures that can verify the implementation of the intervention. Classroom life is complex, and we need to think hard ahead of time about what factors will and could affect treatment. It is the best way I have found to avoid that sinking feeling, as I have had many times. Why didn't I get a better outcome? And as I explained in my AERA presidential talk, which was unfortunately a perfect example, it is hard work and it can be disappointing. But our lives are no different than the lab scientists working for years on cures for diseases. Or think about those engineers facing a third attempt at a rocket launch. But we all know, gain that satisfaction of taking on a challenge of protecting better intervention designs that against all the odds can enhance the learning opportunities of all children. And by gosh, this time we actually did it. So thank you all, and just a few extra thank yous to all of the people who made this all possible, including all of the undergraduates, the graduate students, the postdocs, people in the schools, they were wonderful, and of course, my dear collaborator, and it all makes it all so very worthwhile. And thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Will this work? Oh, it does work. Thank you, Barbara. We have about 30 minutes remaining for questions before we will shift over to the Hedges lecture. Oh, not the reception. We had the lecture, sorry.
Oh, well, you know he wants to start again.
There's another lecture. No, but you'll see that around the room there are microphones. So if folks do have questions for Barbara, you should feel free to go on up and ask them.
I'm waiting, please. I remember I thought I'd start with, well, what did you think of this? So please.
Barbara, right here.
Hi. Where?
I'm right here. I'm right here.
Beth, yes.
I was wondering if you could comment a bit on what it's like to be a sociologist in these studies, in the sense that I've been involved in a lot of randomized trials, and I find there's a lot of psychologists, a lot of education psychologists, a lot of people trained in economics, but I don't find that many sociologists. And what do you think that brings to this? And how do we get more involvement from sociology in this randomized trial space?
Well, thank you, Beth. I think that's a very important question. I tried to bring out as much of that as I could in a very short amount of time by, in fact, talking about Jim and social systems. But it is, in fact, the case that with sociology, you never leave the idea that the intervention itself could change behaviors, but there are a lot of behaviors that are currently going on within the classroom, within the school, if you're, looking at professional development or any other kind of system that work against you, work against the intervention, because there's already a normative social environment in that place that has been in place, and it's quite strong in terms of peer groups and teacher effects. So the sociologists can help and identify what some of those things are. And I find that with some people, and I don't think I'm going to label this by discipline, but they're doing this work for the rigor and the effect. So it's all about what I do and the effect. And then they'll do all kinds of things to get that effect. And I worry about that a lot. In sociology, we're more used to being able to say it didn't work, or there were these other conditions. And in a lot of fields, that doesn't happen. I also wanted to deal with these questions about equity and a level playing field, and questions of inequality of opportunity, which are very much the heart of sociological work and the kinds of studies that kind of flood that field. The other thing that I think is really a problem, at least that I see, is the individual versus the group. And it's not that all studies should be group or all studies should be individuals, but you have to have the individual and the group. And I think that sociology brings the individual in the group, not just the individual by themselves. And I think that that's, to me, one of the best contributions that we can talk about. And to be fair, sociologists don't do a lot of RCT work. They do much more quasi-experimental design work. So that's another kind of problem, because a lot of them don't know RCT designs, and that makes it sometimes very difficult to start thinking about things from an RCT perspective. my feeling about all of this is that we in sociology have not spent enough time teaching about RCT designs. And there was a discussion today about causal inference, and it made me a little bit concerned, because the issues of causal inference start from the RCT design, and I think that we really have kind of messed this up in some ways, and we have to kind of think about inferences and work on them, and where they come from and what they mean and what kind of inferences you're getting from different kinds of designs. My rule of thumb, and this really gets at some things I kind of stayed away from in this talk, are we need our studies to have much more interdisciplinarity of people from different lenses and fields. And I mean real fields, in the sense that people are not just talking the same language to each other. Beth and I worked on the sample design for the growth mindset studies, and she says that was some of the best fun she ever had. And I would agree with her, because we were psychologists, we were sociologists, and there were sampling designers and psychometricians, and it was a lot of fun, and a lot of different people brought a lot to the table, which really made a big difference in the general sample design for that study. But, you know, grab a sociologist if you're doing this work and just ask them, what things do you think we forgot to ask? Or if we went into the classroom and we wanted to look at what was going on in the classroom, what's going on in the prison, what's going on at a school board meeting. And they'll have a different lens than the psychologist, and probably from a statistician and from somebody who is really interested in making sure it's the rigor of the work that's the most important. And that's a problem that I think that we have. And I think it also works in issues related, and that was talked about this morning, about racism and other kinds of issues that we as a country are facing right now, because we absolutely need people to come to the table and start talking to each other and start studying and learning from each other to be able to do better work in our field. I encourage questions. I really like questions.
Barbara? Barbara? Is this on?
You could scream, Greg.
Okay. Barbara?
Ah, ha, ha. Fiona.
Yeah, your lunch partner. So I forgot to ask you this at lunch, and then you brought it up about this issue of the contextual differences. And I'm curious to know what you do about it. So, for example, if you do indeed find that there are significant differences in physical resources or other things that are going on in the treatment versus control, you basically don't have baseline equivalence anymore. What do you do?
Yeah. We haven't run into that problem yet, but I use them in this particular study, Fiona, and I think that that's an excellent question. I looked to make sure that they were in both conditions, because I worried that lots of times cities will take certain low-income performing schools and they'll put a lot of resources into those schools, and they'll be in very poor areas. They will have lots of minority students. They may have students that, many different kinds of ELL students in those schools. So that's why I explained, we spent a lot of time on these things about physical and social resources. That was one of the worries that I had early on when we were looking, just to make sure that if we had low-income minority schools in urban areas, that we actually had them. The only thing that we were not able to replicate on the other hand, because of we had a really nice sample of Hispanics in the Pyers sample, we were 1.5 miles from the Mexican border. So when we were in the school district that we were in, we had teachers there that really helped us tremendously, but the income levels and all the other levels that mattered in terms of balance for the study were there. But they helped us a great deal because we worked with their bilingual teachers, and that made a big difference in making sure that they wanted their science classes to be better, and they were interested in having their kids do more science. And they actually helped us a great deal in, if we needed to translate something or they needed to be at the teacher professional learning, because there are so many of the teachers in that environment are bilingual. So we never found that quite anywhere else, but that really didn't affect our racial and ethnic variation that we needed, or the income levels of our schools, or the regional variation that we wanted in the initial sampling blocks. Greg, you were next, I think. Yes?
That was a great talk.
Thank you.
Congratulations on having 2 successful interventions.
Oh, you have no idea how good that felt.
Not many of us can claim that. I wanted to make sure I understood your point about longer term effects. I certainly understand the difficulties of tracing students. Maybe you've got records that can do it, but actually getting the kind of assessments that you want, getting a high enough response rate for that, 2, 3 X years ahead. But were you trying to make some other point about the potential value of having longer term effects and understanding how much fade out there was and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that longer term effects are always really important, because sometimes when you have an intervention, you might not see something and then later on you see it. But when that happens, and I think it's really important then to be able to hit the unobservables, because why did you get that effect? And given the fact that those conditions that were stable at the initial time are certainly not stable at that time, that you want to be really clear that that later effect, which I certainly support and would encourage people to do. I do follow-up studies all the time. But I think that it's really important that we do a lot of work on what we're trying to see and what else could possibly be the reason for that effect.
Seems like there's a dosage dimension that's important also, right? Is a single year's worth, or do you need every few years to have kind of a booster in order to get a long term?
I think that for me, there are all kinds of long-term effects with the respect of an intervention. So you could say, well, in our case, because we haven't been able to follow the kids, did they have a better interest in science? Did more of them, did a greater proportion of them choose to study science later on? Those are kinds of things that we, could be a year or they could be 2, because we had some 11th graders and some 12th graders. But I think that I know people right now that are looking at 25, 35 years of follow-up, and they're getting math effects. So I think Sandy Black had one of those articles, and I think that it's really interesting that, you can get amazing effects, all the way 25, 35 years later. Sometimes you can get great effects 2 years, and then sometimes we don't get effects. It just depends on, how strong the intervention was, what the design was around that intervention, and how desperate that difference might be given the length of time and what happened to the population that you're looking at.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't recognize who that is. I think that's a student of Terry's.
My name is Ringen. I'm actually a computer science, what am I now? Technically affiliate faculty? Such a weird title. I'm from University of Washington, yeah. Yeah, thank you for the talk. So as I mentioned, I'm more from machine learning background, and one of the comments that you made about carefully choosing studies and being prepared for disappointing results occasionally made me think about the idea that in machine learning, you can't train classifiers on only positive examples. You want negative examples, and in fact, you want surprising negative examples. And I was wondering if there's a similar principle, or like if you have any advice on how you learn from quote unquote failed experiments. Or if you've ever discovered something really surprising that then helped you design something that worked in the future.
Mm-hmm. I've learned a great deal from my own failed experiments, from rethinking, reading some other work that also failed. They didn't fail in the same way that I failed, but they also failed. In their case, they didn't look at individual effects. We looked at individual effects, but the biggest problem had to do more with the school counselor and the structure of the school that allowed for fewer kids to take advantage of learning more about what kind of place to go. I didn't understand the first part of the question, as I myself am just have moved into the foray of machine learning and have learned, I can tell you a lot about unsupervised models where you just pour everything in and neural networks and decision trees. But I think I missed the first part of that. So could you please repeat that?
Maybe I could ask it in a better way. So sometimes in machine learning, we'll request a sample in order to classify. So like we'll say, human or Oracle, can you classify the sample for me, possibly expecting that it will fail, but hoping that we'll learn from the failure. So I guess in this scenario, maybe a good analog do you have any recommendations for what data that you should collect or how you should run a study so that even if it does fail, that you'll learn something that will be helpful from it?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that question. I can tell you what some students that are working with me on that in terms of looking at teacher observations without giving any kind of model, and then trying to understand field-related notes to those observations. We have looked at constructed responses for several hundred kids, and we've put those in models. They're actual models, students drawing models. We've done a lot of work on model development as part of the intervention for both the high school and the elementary. And so we've put those in different algorithms for machines. I've been very worried about race and ethnicity, but that's another kind of huge issue to me that it has ethical problems, and I'm worried about the ethics of what we're doing with machine learning as well, to try and understand what we're going to give the unsupervised model, or what we're trying to see if they can predict a better model. So I think that there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot that I certainly need to learn and don't know enough about. And I wish I had a better answer for your question, but I don't. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Thank you for the lecture. I mean, it was amazing. So one of the things you spoke to is how the field of education and research has changed, over your career and how it's expanded and brought in new fields and new individuals. And so what are you most excited about the future of education research, right? We're all here, we're all doing it. Like, what are you looking forward to seeing at the next 3 or the 5 years from now?
Well, one thing that I'm really excited about is that there's so many young new faces and people I don't know, which always excites me, because the fact is that there are a lot of people in this room I don't know. And to me, that's a great thing, because that means that we're reaching a much wider audience. And whenever I meet these people, oh my God, they're so much better trained than I could have ever hoped to be. They know they can do things that I can't do, and they do it so much better. Their do files are so much better than anything I ever did. These are things, you think about and you say to yourself, really? But they do mean an awful lot. They mean that the people that are in this room that do this work are better than I am, and I'm very happy for that, because they'll be able to answer that gentleman's question that I couldn't. So, where do you go from here? Well, we go because we have confidence and hope in all of you. And in terms of my own life, I kind of feel like, oh my gosh, I was so lucky to have met Joe, and that Joe had a model for what he thought science learning should be about. And I looked at that and I said, wow, I wonder if he knew John Dewey. Of course he didn't. He's not that old. He's younger than me. But, his idea of what science education should be about was really, I said, wow, I didn't know this model. This is great. This is exactly what we need. This is exactly what we're looking for. This is exactly what we need to be paying attention to today, right now, while kids want environmental science, when they want to understand what's going on to their world, why they're going to pay $5 for a glass of water and 50 cents for a Diet Coke. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but I think that for me, it is our time as researchers also to please, and I'm making a plea here, we cannot go on. This planet will not survive if, in fact, we do not take more care and thought about science education. And the fact that these interventions worked, oh my God, they're so complicated. There are all these measures. They were in a different state. We had to have people all over the place. And that the people that did the work are still interested in working with me and doing their own work and making it better. That's our hope. So where are we going? We're going to go where Beth wants to go, I hope. We're going to do more interdisciplinary work. We're going to tackle questions of racism by bringing people together and talking about it from different perspectives so that we start to get better at what we're doing. Cancer research for women got much better when there were researchers that were women. And my guess is that the problems that we have as a society will be better if we can bring a bigger tent to all the people that need to be working on these problems, including the gentleman whose answers I didn't have. So for all of you, thank you. And I think that we're making progress. We are making progress. Hey, if I could make progress, we all can do a much better, bigger job. Thank you.